Okay, Samach Vav Amid Beis. Let me review the Mishnah, the concept of the first two cases of the Mishnah, and then I'll explain what's going on in the Gemara. So, the Mishnah started off by giving two rules, but the Lashon is actually important. The Lashon is Kol Makom Sheyesh Kiddushin Ven Ein Avera. Anytime, Kol Makom is an inclusive terminology. Anytime you have a marriage where it's a regular marriage, no Avera, you go by the dad. So seemingly that's referring to she's a Bas Kayin and he's a Yisrael, you're a Yisrael. You go by the dad. The Ezuzu, and what's an example of this, which is a Lashon that's Memayit. So it starts off with an inclusive Lashon, then it ends with a specific Lashon. Kehenes Levi Yisrael, Shenasu L'kayin Levi Yisrael. Fun. Second category, same Kol Makom, which is inclusive, ends with Ezuzu. The second category is a marriage where there is an Avera, but it's not a Mamzer, it's not Chayve Krisos. The halacha is with that, you don't go by the dad, you go by the biggest problem. Meaning, let's say a person is marrying a Mamzer, so you're not allowed to do that. So if the dad's a Mamzer, you're a Mamzer. If the mom's a Mamzer, you're a Mamzer. We don't go by the mom or the dad, we go by the problem. Okay. When anytime there's an Avera, there's a Chayve Lavin, there's an Avera in the marriage,
But the marriage is still...
it's typhus, it's not a kares, you go by the problem. Okay, so the first category is no Avera, second category is Avera. The first category has Kol Makom and Ezuzu. The second category is Kol Makom Ezuzu. What we're going to be doing now from here, basically the first Amid in a little bit, is we're going to find cases that either don't work, that either contradict the Mishnah, and it's a contradiction, or they work with the Mishnah, but they're not listed in the Mishnah. Why not? And we're constantly just going to say, well, Kol Makom is including the cases that are not listed, and Ezuzu excludes the exceptions. That's an exception, Ezuzu. That's basically how we're going to swim out of this case. All right, let's start the Gemara. Kol Makom Sheyesh Kiddushin, Amalei Rav Shimon Rav Yochanan, Klalahu. You're telling me it's a rule that anytime it's a kosher marriage, you go by the dad? The Kol Makom Sheyesh Kiddushin Vein Avera, anytime it's a regular marriage with no Avera, you go by the dad. Havlad halacha chazachar. I have an exception to that. Ger shenasa mamzeres. Now we know a Jew is not allowed to marry a mamzer. What about a convert? So it's a machlokes tanoim, whether a convert is allowed to marry a mamzer. If you believe that they could, so that's an example of a marriage that has no avera, that you don't go by the dad, because you go by whoever's the mamzer, right? If the mom's a mamzer and marries a convert husband, the kid's a mamzer. If the dad's a mamzer and the mom's a convert, the kid's a mamzer. You don't go by the mom or the dad, you go by the problem. But that's a marriage that's permitted. We found a little bit of according to one opinion, a ger is allowed to marry a mamzer. And what's the child? The child goes by the problem. It doesn't go by the dad. If the mom's a mamzer, the kid's a mamzer. If the dad's a mamzer, the kid's a mamzer. You go by the mamzer. You go by the problem. So that's an example of a marriage that's 100% permitted, but you don't go by the dad. So that's an exception to the rule. Again, classically, when you think of a marriage that's permitted, you go by the dad, you're just thinking of regular marriage. One's a Yisrael, one's a Levi, one's a Kayin. But this is an example where, according to Rabbi Yossi, a ger is allowed to marry a mamzer, and the child's definition is not by the mom or the dad, it's by the problem. If you go by the dad, that would mean that if a mamzeres marries a ger, the child is not a mamzer. Because you go by the dad's not a mamzer. That's not true. You go by the problem. So that's an example of no avera, but you go by the problem. It's not like the Mishnah. So the Gemara says, Yesh Kiddushin Vein Avera, Havlad Halachachar Apogum. According to one opinion, which is Rav Yossi, a ger is allowed to marry a mamzer, and the child becomes a mamzer. Titania, ger shenosam mamzeres havlad mamzer div Rav Yossi. So that's an example of a marriage that's permitted, yet the child doesn't go by the dad, it goes by the problem. So the Gemara answers, Amrle, mi savar masis and Rav Yossi. Our Mishnah is not Rav Yossi, who says that a convert is allowed to marry a mamzer. Our Mishnah follows the view of Rav Yehuda. Masis and Rav Yehuda, Damar ger lo yisa mamzeres, v'yesh kedushin v'yesh avera havlad ha'ilachachar apagim. Our Mishnah follows the view of Rav Yehuda that a convert is not allowed to marry a mamzer. It's a chayve lavin. If it's a chayve lavin, then it works perfectly in the second example, the second case of our Mishnah. Anytime there's a chayve lavin, you go by the problem, not by the dad. So our Mishnah doesn't follow Rav Yehuda. So now if you're telling me that our Mishnah follows Rabbi Yehuda, our Mishnah doesn't follow Rabbi Yossi, it follows Rabbi Yehuda. So here's the problem, basically. If you follow Rabbi Yossi, a convert is allowed to marry a mamzer, then that's an example that the first case of our Mishnah is wrong, because that's an example where it's a kosher marriage, but you don't go by the dad. So we said we don't follow Rabbi Yossi, we follow Rabbi Yehuda, that a convert is not allowed to marry a mamzer. So it works perfectly in the second example, where it's an Avera marriage, and you go by the problem. Then how come it's not listed? That's the problem. If you follow Rabbi Yossi, it's contradicting the first example. If you follow Rabbi Yehuda, then why isn't it listed in the Mishnah? The Mishnah should list that as an example of the second. It works perfectly in the second case. Then it should be listed, a convert marrying a mamzer. The Mishnah lists a regular Jew marrying a mamzer. It should list a convert marrying. Why isn't it listed? I'm saying, if you're good, whatever. That's the problem. It either contradicts the first example, or it works perfectly in the second example, but it's omitted.
What's omitted?
A convert marrying a mamzer.
Give me one example. Converts is considered Yisrael.
No, but you should say that because that's a bigger chiddush, because it's a machlokas whether a convert can marry. So you should say a convert can't marry, and if you do, you go by the problems, like v'nis ninu, so it should be listed. The answer is, again, as I said, the two sections of our mission, the first and the second, starts off with kol makom, which is inclusive, which could include cases not listed, and it ends with ezuzu, which could exclude exceptions. So this is included in the second kol makom. V'nis ninu. Tana kol makom d'seifel asuya, that's included in the kol makom of the second example. You're right, it's not listed. It's kol makom includes that. Okay, let's keep going. Or iba yisem l'olam Rav Yossi, or you could actually say that really it follows Rav Yossi, and that a convert is allowed to marry a mamzer. And this is a problem with the first example, because this is an example of a kosher marriage that doesn't go by the dad. You know what the answer is? The first category of the Mishnah says ezuzu, which excludes exceptions. This is the exception. A convert. So either it works in the second category and it's included in kol makom, and that's why it's not listed, or it follows Rav Yossi and it's the exception to the first rule, but ezuzu excludes that. Okay. That's basically how we're going to swim out of every case. Let's keep going. Ve'ezuzu b'sulo. What if a cholol marries a Yisrael, marries a Jewish woman? Yesh Kiddushin ve'ein avera. There's no avera. You can marry a cholol. What's the halacha? Havlad holach achar azacher. Why isn't it mentioned? It should be mentioned in the first. This is an example of the first category. You have a cholol who marries a bas Yisrael. The child is like the dad, but that's a kosher marriage. There's no avera. You can marry a cholol. So how come it isn't listed? It works perfectly with the first example. Why isn't it listed? That's always what you're going to have. You're going to have a case which either works in the first case, but it's not listed, is an exception to the first case, that contradicts it, works in the second case, but not listed, or contradicts the second case. And we're going to swim our way out. So the Gemara says, this Mishnah follows Rav Destoi ben Rav Yehuda, that if a Yisrael marries a cholol, they do not become cholol. So it's not like the first. So the reason why it's not listed is because it's an exception to the first rule.
So meaning what? Meaning
that the child is not a cholol.
He's a Kohen.
He's a Kohen?
Well, I guess, yeah.
The other option.
Yeah, I guess so.
And then he's able to do Truma? I guess, right?
Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about, interesting. Well, we're going to see his shita in 10 dafim. What does Rashi say? Kiddushin ben Yehuda. So no. So if the Daf ben Yehuda does not believe that the kid's kosher, the kid's a kohen, but he believes that if it's a daughter, she's kosher l'kahuna. She's considered a bas kohen. Yeah. I don't think he would say that. He would say that. We'll get to his shita, but well, if she marries. Well, if she marries a kohen, he's not going to be able to trum. There's no trum in that house. Right. But okay, let's keep going. Hare Yisrael shenasa halala. What about the opposite case? A male Yisrael marries a halala. What's the halacha? There's no avera. Yesh Kiddushin ve'ein avera. Havlad hoylech achar azacher. And it goes by the dad. Why is that not listed? That's a perfect example of the first case. The answer is Tana kol makom dereisha l'asuya. That's included in kol makom dereisha. The kol makom includes that case. That's why it wasn't listed. V'nisniu behadei. So why not list it? Why isn't it listed? So you said it's included in kol makom, but what was the reason? Meaning practically, why couldn't we list that case? I'll tell you why. What's the case? Yisrael marries a halala. It couldn't be listed in the Mishnah because I'll tell you why. The Mishnah just wants to make things clear, easy. it lists marriages that are mutter. So you know what it says? A Yisrael, a Levi, and a Kohen. Why not list a Yisrael that marries a Chalala? Because a Yisrael can marry a Chalala. A Levi can marry a Chalala. A Kohen cannot. So now you're going to start, it'll just take a lot of words. You'll have to say, Yisrael shenasa Chalala, Velevi shenasa Chalala, Velo Kohen. It's like, okay, forget it. It's just easy to just not write it. It just wouldn't, it wouldn't flow well. Mishum delay masni le, it would be hard to teach it properly because heichi nechna. What do you want it to say? Kohenes v'levi Yisrael v'chalala. You can't write it. Shenisis l'kohen v'levi Yisrael v'chalala kohen michazia. You'd have to start getting. It would take too many words to clarify that halacha. So we'd rather just skip it. Let's keep going. Ha'ika de Rabbi Bar Chana. What about Rabbi Bar Chana's teaching? Why is that not listed in the Mishnah? Dam Rabbi Bar Chana Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, the halacha is that if a Mitzri converts, he can marry a Mitzris convert. Second generation, they can marry Mitzris convert. The third generation, they're allowed to marry regular Jews. Dar shlishi yava b'kalasham, right? Only after 3 generations. So the question is, so you have to know if you're a third generation Mitzri or a second generation Mitzri. So here's the question. Mitzri Sheni, you have a second generation male Mitzri, Shenosis Mitzris Rishona, that marries a first generation Mitzris. So does the boy go after the dad, and is the boy a third generation, or does it go by the mom and a second generation? So what's the halacha? B'nashlishi have it. Rabbi Chana's opinion is that you go by the dad. So that's an example of a marriage that's 100% permitted. They're converts, they're Jews. They're marrying each other, 100% permitted. It goes by the dad. Why is that not listed? The answer is Kol Makom Dereishel Asuya. That's included in Kol Makom. Okay. Now that's Rabbi Bar Chana's opinion. That when you have a second generation Mitzri that marries a first generation Mitzris, the child goes by the dad. Why? And it's an example of the first case, but it's just not listed because it's included in Kol Makom. Now that's Rabbi Bar Chana. Rav Dimi disagrees. He says you actually go by the mom. So that's an example of an exception to the first case. Ul Rav Dimi Damar Sheni Hava Tana Ezuzu Lemute. That's included in Ezuzu as the exception. So it's not talked about in the Mishnah. It either goes by the dad and it goes well with the Mishnah and it's just not written and it's included in Kol Makom, or it's an exception to the Mishnah because you go by the mom and that's the exception included in Ezuzu.
By the pigam.
Well, in this case, you go by the mom. The point is you don't necessarily go by the dad. You're right. It goes by the worst one. Yeah, but the point is you don't necessarily go by the dad. So that would be included in Ezuzu. That's the exception. It goes by Ezuzu. Okay. Another one. We'll see exactly what the case is, but when it comes to non-Jews, you go by the dad. This is referring to a case where we're dealing with it right now. There's a mitzvah deraisa when they entered Israel to kill every member of the 7 nations that were in Israel. What happens if you have a male 7 nations that marries an American and has a baby, or vice versa? You have an American male that marries a Canaanite and has a baby. Do you kill the baby? Is the baby go by the mom or the dad? So halach is you go by the dad. Whatever the dad is. If the dad was one of the 7 nations and he was supposed to be killed, he has a baby, you kill the baby. If the mom, if the dad was an American and you could let them live, then you could let the baby live. That's the halach. You go by the dad. Nizgairu, let's say they convert. Halach achar pagim shemishneim. You go by the problem. Now what this is referring to, as we'll see in the next Amid, we know that in Ammon, velo Ammonis, an Ammonis convert can marry a Jew. That was David HaMelech. He came from Rus, HaMoaviyah, from a female Moab. A male Moav convert can never marry a Jew. So let's say you have a male Moav that marries a Mitzris convert. So is the child a Mitzri, and then after 3 generations he's permitted, or do you go by the Ammon? Or vice versa, whatever the case. The halacha is, Nizgairu halach achar pagum sheb'shneim. You don't go by the dad, you go by the problem. So that's an example of it's a completely kosher marriage. The 2 converts, you don't go by the dad, you go by the problem. So that contradicts the first. Again, we'll see exactly the case in the next Amid, but basically you're having 2 converts that come from different nations that are problems for them to marry regular Jews. And the question is, do you go by the mom or the dad? The answer is you go by the problem. So that's an example of an exception to the first rule. So the Gemara says, Ezuzu l'mute, same answer. Ezuzu excludes. That's the exception, and it's Ezuzu excludes.
I don't understand. What do you mean that we go by the problem?
Meaning, you have an Ammon convert who marries a Mitzris convert. So is the baby a Mitzris convert, or is the baby an Ammon convert? Because if it's an Ammon, that's a problem forever. If it's a Mitzri, it'll be mutter after 3 generations. Or vice versa. The point is, you go by the problem. You don't go by the dad. So the answer is that's the exception, Ezuzu. Okay. Now, this next few lines I'm going to read fairly quickly. Basically, there's 2 cases in the Mishnah. One starts off with Kol Malkum, one ends off with Ezuzu, including cases not listed, excluding exceptions. Second category, Kol Malkum, including cases not listed, excluding exceptions. If you were to make a chart of all the cases that we just had, all of them that were listing exceptions that are excluded by Ezuzu, all of them listed, the ones that are not listed included in Kol Malkum, you'll have one extra that is not teaching anything. So there's going to be one Ezuzu that's extra, or one Kol Malkum that's extra. You understand? There's 4 terminologies. The first case has a Kol Malkum, which includes cases not listed, and Ezuzu excludes exceptions not listed. The second category, Kol Malkum Ezuzu, if you fill it in with all the cases, Rav Dimi's case, Rav Barchana's case, Rav Yehuda's case, Rav Yossi's case, there's one that's unnecessary. Either according to one opinion, the second Kol Malkum is unnecessary, according to one opinion, the Ezuzu isn't. And the answer is it was written just for the flow. If I had a chart, I'd be like, okay, a mitzris, we said, is, according to one opinion, an exception included in the second Ezuzu, and according to one, it's a proof of the rule, according in the first Kol Malkum. You understand? Hi, Mai. If you follow that, our Mishnah is Rav Yehuda. Kol Malkum, which was the first category. Rav Yehuda's opinion is that a convert cannot marry a mamzeres, and that was an example of something not listed in the Mishnah that works well with the second case that was included in the second Kol Malkum. So then, Kol Malkum dereish la'asuye Yisrael shenasa chalala. You'd fill in the blanks. I barely can, again, it's not hard, you just need a chart. The first Kol Malkum is included a Yisrael shenasa chalala, which we said is a permitted marriage that you go by the mom, you don't go by the dad. That's the, you go by the dad, so that's an example, the first halacha, it's just not written there. Or the Rabbi Chana. Ezuzu, the Ezuzu is to exclude Rav Dimi v'Ravin. Go to the next page. That's the first 2 cases. Kol Malkum de Seifa, in the second case, the Kol Malkum of the Aseifa is Lasuye Gersha Nasa Mamzeres. That includes a Gersha Nasa Mamzeres, which according to Rav Yehuda is not allowed, and it's a perfect example of the second category, it's just not listed. The Ezuzu is extra, okay. But Eli Yamri, Rav Yossi, but if you follow Rav Yossi, Kol Malkum de Reisha Kida Amrin, Ezuzu Kida Amrin, El Kol Malkum de Seifa Lasuyimai. According to Rav Yossi, the second Kol Malkum is doing nothing. So the answer is, according to Rav Yehuda, the second Ezuzu is extra. The answer is according to one opinion. One of the things are extra. According to Rav Yehuda, the second Ezuzu is not teaching anything. According to Rav Yossi, the second Kol Malkum is not teaching anything. What's the answer? It was written for the flow. That's how the Mishnayos are written, to mirror each other. Ella, I did the Tanaresha Ezuzu Tanaseifa Uzuzu Achanami. I did the Tanaresha Kol Malkum Tanaseifa Kol Malkum. So therefore, there's no problem. Okay, fine. Back to the Gemara. Whatever I'm saying, if you sit and you'll make a cheshbon, you'll realize that some teachings are extra, some teachings are not extra. It's as clear as you'll get without a chart. Okay, Gufa. Kiyasa Ravin Am Rav Yechanan. We had this halacha before, and now we're going to clarify this. Bu'umais halacha acher azachar. When it comes to the nations of the world, you go by the male, nizgairu, but when they convert, halacha acher apogum, you go with the problem. So what does this mean? So I told you what this means, but the Gemara is going to see it inside. What this means... Yeah. Now, it's based on Psukim. Now, the Gemara is going to say, what does it mean? So it means that you go by the male, by a convert, by a goyim, it means if one of they're goyim, one of them is from the 7 nations and one of them is an American. So is the baby from the 7 nations that you have to kill, or is the baby considered an American that you could let live? So what's the halacha? You go by the dad. Kiyasa Ravin, Rav Yechanan, Bu'umas halacha acher zachar, Neskailu hachar apagam shebishneim. My Bu'umas halacha zachar. What does this mean? So, Kedetanya, as the Brisa teaches, Minayin le'echa min ha'umais. How do I know that if you have one member of le'echa min ha'umais, you have one member of the 7 nations, again, which you had to kill when they entered Israel, Shebo al Knanis, v'hoylid ben. I'm sorry, you have one member of an American. You start with an American, British person, someone from not 7 nations. The dad is not Israel, not Canaanite. I'll say that's the.
Let's say Palestine.
Palestine. There's no nation called Palestine. Let's grab a tissue for a second. Poland, Palestinians. There's no nation called Palestine. Hold on one second.
Too early in the morning.
Sorry. So if you have, the dad is not from the seven nations. The dad is American. Okay. Shabal Kananis, and he lives with a woman who is from the seven nations. They have a child. So is the child, if you go by the mom, you have to kill the child. If you go by the dad, then you could let him live. They would keep him as slaves, but you could let them live. Sha'ata rashai l'knoiseh be'eved. You're allowed to buy him as a slave, meaning you do not have to kill his child because you go by the dad, and the dad is American, so the baby's American. How do I know this? Tamaloimer. The b'nei hatoshavim hagarim imachem tiknu. The pasuk says you're allowed to buy slaves. You don't have to kill them. B'nei hatoshavim, from the children of the people that reside where you live, meaning generally the father would go to where the mom lived. So the father is staying in Israel because the mom is Israeli. The mom is Canaanite. So the pasuk is saying even someone who is staying in Israel, meaning the dad moved to Israel to be with his wife, you can buy that as a slave. Why? Because the dad's American, he's Toshavim, he is coming to be with his wife, which is, she's a Chivi or Yevusi or Canaanite, whatever it is. You're allowed to buy them. You don't have to kill them because you go by the dad. And the dad is not one of the Sheva Umais. Yachal, what about the reverse? Yachal af Evet, Shabal Shivcha Mina Umais V'Ha'il Ben. What if the opposite case, you have a Canaanite male that lived with a American woman and has a baby? Shata Rashel Knesset, you might think you could buy him as a slave also, and you don't have to kill the child. Tamaloimar, Asher Harlidu Ba'artzachem, Minane Loda Ba'artzachem, V'lei Min Agarim Ba'artzachem. The pasuk says you could only buy them if they were born in Israel, meaning V'lei Min Agarim Ba'artzachem, but not from ones who were born abroad and came in. The rule was generally that you went, they went where the mom was. So min hagarim ba'artzachem, min alad ba'artzachem, min hagar ba'artzachem, you can't buy a baby that was gar ba'artzachem. What that means is that originally the baby was born outside of Israel because the dad is from Canaanite. He went to have a baby in America, then brought the baby back. In other words, you go by the dad. Both these psukim allude that you go by the dad.
But not the dad.
Yes, you go by the dad in either case. The point is, if you want to medayik in the drushes, the rule was generally that the male followed the woman where she was. So if the male was toshavim, if he's staying in Israel, that means that he is a American outside of Israel that came to Israel to live with the woman. That means that the dad is not Canaanite. No, Garim Ba'artzachem would imply the opposite. Garim Ba'artzachem would mean that the baby was born outside of Israel because the dad is Canaanite. He went to America to have a baby, then brought the baby back.
So it all has to be going after the father.
Correct.
And it has to be, if you kill the baby, it has to be born in Israel.
No. It goes by the dad.
No matter what.
Yes, it goes by the dad. I'm just explaining the drusha itself.
Dad is the Kanani who
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You have to kill him. Yeah. My point is, I'm just explaining the drushas. The drushas are based on the premise that the husband would generally travel to the wife.
No, I understand that, but if the baby was born in
You're not allowed to let those Shiva Umas live.
even in New York.
To my knowledge, it's not practical because they were entering Israel. I don't know. Okay, fine. No, I know, but if they leave Eretz Yisrael, are you obligated to? Are you allowed to let them live? Not sure. I don't know. I think you're allowed to make peace with them outside of Israel. I don't know. So anyway, that's if they're a goy. Then the Brisa says if they convert, then you go by the problem. So what does that mean? What's the case? Meaning, in other words, you have two converts that have a baby. The baby goes by the problem. So what exactly is the case? You have a Mitzri convert that marries an Ammonis. Here's the problem. Are there two problems there? The halacha is, again, we're looking for a case. We have two converts. Both are a problem. You go by the bigger problem. So you have a Mitzri convert. That's a problem because you got to get 3 generations, right? Marries an Ammonis convert. The problem is an Ammonis convert is a regular Jew. right? Amoni v'lo Amonis. An Amonis convert is a full-fledged Jew, like Rus. She could marry anybody. So that's not an example of two converts that both have a problem that you go by the bigger problem. That's a problem marrying a non-problem. That's not a good example. We're looking for two big problems where you go by the bigger one. So it can't be a Mitzri convert that marries an Amonis convert, because an Amonis convert is 100% Jew. There's no problem there. The Gemara says, my pagomika, there's no problem with an Amonis, Amoni v'lo Amonis. The Pasuk only says that an Amoni is not allowed to marry a regular Jew, an Amonis could. So a Mitzri convert who marries an Amonis convert, that's an example of a Mitzri marrying a Jew, full-fledged Jew. There's no problem there. So that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for a case where there's two converts, both have a problem, but you go by the bigger problem. So you know what the answer is? It's reverse. Amoni, an Amoni male convert. Now the halacha is, an Ammoni male convert can never marry a Jew. So that's a big problem. Shenasa mitzris. You have an Ammoni convert that marries a first-generation mitzris. So the question is, what do you do with the baby? Is the baby a Mitzri second generation? Which is a problem, but it's not the biggest problem in the world, because then his kids will be okay. Or do you go by the dad, that the baby is an Ammoni, and it's a major problem? By the way, this is true for the male or the female. Let me just explain, because I don't think people understand what I'm saying. You have an Ammoni male convert marries a Mitzris convert, has a baby. What's the baby? So if it's a female, so you're going to say, just go by the dad, because the Ammoni is a bigger problem, right? Not necessarily. If you give birth to a girl, right, so then if you go by the dad, the girl is an Ammonis. She's 100% mutter, like Rus. So in that case, you go by the mom. She's a second generation mitzvahs, because you don't want to go by the dad, because you go by the problem. When you have a baby girl, there is no problem on one generation if you make her an Ammonis. So therefore you make her a mitzvahs. If you have a boy, then the choice is make him a Mitzri second generation, or make him an Ammoni male, which is usher forever. We make him an Ammoni male. So you don't go by the mom or the dad, you go by the problem. So when it's a baby boy, you'll make him go by the dad. When it's a baby girl, you go by the mom. You hear what I'm saying? Because if it's a baby girl, you always go with the problem, the bigger problem. If you give birth to a girl, so an Ammoni male convert, Mitzris convert, have a baby girl, if you go by the dad, then the girl is now an Ammonis, 100% mutter. No good. You go by the mom in that case. Make her a second generation Mitzris. So, problem. If you have a boy, then you go by the dad. Make him an Ammoni, which is much worse. So, that's the point. You don't go by the mom or the dad, you go by the problem. The answer is, okay. From here into the end of the daf is just drushes. The point is just to prove the following concept, which is, the last category of the Mishnah is that if you have a chayve krisus that gets married, the child's a mamzer and Kiddushin is not typhus. How do you know that? How do you know that Kiddushin is not typhus on the chayve krisus? I know that you get kares, I know you get the death penalty, but how do you know that Kiddushin is not typhus on a chayve krisus? So the Gemara says, Kol shein of Kiddushin. Mino hani mili. How do I know that Kiddushin is not typhus on a relationship that's chayv kares? So, Amar Chia Barabba, Amar Rav Yochanan. Umatam Mishum de Rav Yanai, V'Ravacha B'De Rava, Umatam Mishum de Rav Yosef Glili. They quote different Tanoim. Amar Krab. The pasuk says, the pasuk describes divorce. So you have a husband and a wife. The pasuk says, V'Yotza V'Beisai V'Holcha V'Hais L'Shacher. He divorces his wife, and his ex-wife marries someone else. The implication is, La'acherim. She could only marry other people. V'Loi L'Krevim. She can't marry his relatives. Meaning, Kiddushin is only typhus if she tries to marry a random dude. If she tries to marry her ex-stepchild, her father-in-law, it won't work. So that's an example. Kiddushin is not typhus by chayve krisus. The pasuk again says that his ex-wife marries someone else. The implication is she can only marry someone else. If instead of marrying someone else, she wants to marry her father-in-law, her son-in-law, her stepson, no good. Okay. Now the Gemara says, so that's a proof that all chayve krisus are out. Maskela Rav Abba ve'imel acher below leben. Maybe the pasuk is describing the closest relationship. Meaning, maybe chayve krisus, there could be Kiddushin typhus in general, but one chayve krisus is out, and that's her stepson. Maybe only her stepson is out. The pasuk says she marries someone else. she can't marry, she can only marry someone else, she can't marry Chayve Krisis. So we're saying maybe it's not Chayve Krisis, maybe it's just she can't marry her stepson. Why stepson? Rashi says we just picked a Chayve Krisis that's very close to her. Meaning maybe she could marry her, a person can marry his aunt, maybe Kiddushin is typhus on a married woman, maybe Kiddushin is typhus on your daughter-in-law. It just says she can't marry someone, maybe just her stepson. Maybe just her stepson. So the Gemara says, Ben behed yiksibeh. Well, I already know that this chayv krisis on your stepson. Lo yikach ish shesaviv. The pasuk says that a stepson is not allowed to marry his stepmom. So why would I need a special pasuk telling me that Kiddushin is not typhus? Achar lamli. Meaning I already know this chayv krisis. So you're telling me there's one pasuk that implies that Kiddushin is not typhus. Maybe Kiddushin is only not typhus on a stepson. So the Gemara said, well, I know that stepson's chayv krisis, so why would I think it's different than any other ones? It must be it's including all chayv krisis. Maybe it's like this. Maybe the pasuk is only referring to the stepson, and there's two psukim. One pasuk says that it's chayv krisis, which means you shall not lo yikach, which means lo yikach, not just chayv krisis. Lo yikach means do not marry her. So that implies that Kiddushin is not typhus. So I have one pasuk that implies Kiddushin is not typhus by a stepson, and now you tell me there's a second pasuk that Kiddushin is not typhus on a stepson. Not to say that the second pasuk includes all arayas. Two psukim for a stepson. Why would I need two psukim for a stepson? So the Gemara says, I'll tell you what. Maybe Kiddushin is only not typhus by a stepson, and the two psukim, what do I need two psukim for? One is to tell you don't marry her l'chachila, and one is to say that b'diavad it doesn't work. Meaning, maybe the both psukim are only talking about a stepson. Lo yikach and la'acherim. What do I need both psukim for? One is to tell you, l'chachila, don't marry her. And two is, b'diavad, it doesn't work. So I need two psukim to tell me the Kiddushin is not typhus on a stepson. I do not know.
Why would you just need b'diavad, it doesn't work? And you know,
because you only have one pasuk, maybe it just means, l'chachila, don't try to marry her, but b'diavad it works. But we only know a stepson. So the Gemara says, L'chachila, so you're telling me one pasuk is telling me L'chachila, don't marry your stepson, and the second one is saying b'diavad. Why would I need a pasuk telling me L'chachila, don't marry her? Don't I already know this from Achais Isha, your sister-in-law? The pasuk says regarding a sister-in-law, Uma Achais Isha b'kares loy tikdash, chayvi misas bezdin loy kol shekain. Don't I already know this from your sister-in-law? Meaning, the pasuk says by your sister-in-law, the pasuk says by Achais Isha, the pasuk says by your sister-in-law, lo yikach. So I already know that don't again. There's two psukim by a stepson. You're telling me one is l'chachila, don't try to marry him, and two is b'diavad, it doesn't work. I already know that l'chachila you shouldn't try to marry him because I know the pasuk says by your sister-in-law, don't marry her. Don't try to lo yikach, don't try to marry her. So I already know that chayv krisis are l'chachila off limits. So I don't need two psukim. Again, one pasuk is telling me that your stepson is l'chachila, don't try to marry him. The second is b'diavad, it doesn't work. I already know that l'chachila they're off limits because the pasuk says by your sister-in-law who's chayv kares l'chachila, don't marry her. Lo yikach. So I already know that l'chachila they're off limits. So why do I need two psukim by the stepson? It must be one is to tell me b'diavad it doesn't work, and two is to tell me all arayas are out. So the Gemara says, okay, ema edi b'achais isha. Okay, instead of saying stepson, maybe the pasuk is actually just referring to your sister-in-law. The pasuk just says, marry other people, don't marry relatives. So maybe the pasuk is referring to achos isha, your sister-in-law, and is halachachila hadiavad. And two psukim, one is to tell you l'chachila, don't marry her, one is to tell you b'diavad. Okay, so what we've summarized right now is we have two psukim that say, do not marry your sister-in-law. One is outright, one is an indication. One is to tell you l'chachila, don't marry her, and one is to tell you that Kiddushin is not typhus by your sister-in-law. So we've proved that Kiddushin is not typhus by his sister-in-law. So the Gemara says, good, okay. So we have proven that we have a source that Kiddushin is not typhus by your sister-in-law. How do I know that this applies to all other arayas? The answer is, it's a svara. It's a svara. You learn it out from achos isha. Yafinu achos isha. By the way, this is not a hekish. This is just a svara. We're going to learn it out from achos isha, from your sister-in-law. Mach ochos isha miyuchadish yerva. Just like your sister-in-law is arayis v'chayim nazdan nekaris. Bashigos echadas. Any chayv kares and chatas leitasi b'kedushin, and kedushin is not typhus. Av kol sheyerva v'chayim nazdan nekaris. Bashigos echadas leitasi b'kedushin. Okay, so we have a pasuk that proves that your sister-in-law kedushin is not typhus. How do I know the sharayis? It's a rational concept. I'll learn it out from my sister-in-law. The problem is, if you're not doing a hekesh, you're just using svara, then any problem in the limud will throw us off course. Meaning, right now I am saying the source that Kiddushin is not typhus is my sister-in-law, and from my sister-in-law I'm applying it to all the other arayas. Here's the problem. There are two arayas that you cannot learn it out from, and that is Eishes Ach, your brother's wife. Why? No, the Achos Isha is your wife's sister. This is Eishes Ach, your brother's wife. I'll tell you why, because your brother's wife is Yibam. So you can't learn that out from the other one because that has a special halacha that no other arayas have. Is that mutter? And also Eishes Ish, because Eishes Ish is the only erva that is permitted while the person is still alive, right? Every other erva, Eishes Ish, through divorce, you can marry this woman. It's the only woman that she became usher because of a person, because of her husband, and in the husband's lifetime you could marry her. So these two arayas are unique. So you're telling me I'm learning out all arayas from Achos Isha, that I won't be able to learn Eishes Ach, and I won't be able to learn Eishes Ish, because they're unique. Eishes Ach, because there's a mitzvah yibum, which no other one has a mitzvah to marry, and Eishes Ish, because it's the only one that is an erva, that becomes usher because of a subject, in this case the husband, that becomes permitted in the subject's lifetime, case of divorce. So those are the two arayas that you can't learn out from Achos Isha. Again, unless you have a hekish, as we'll prove in a second. Once you have a hekish, then we don't ask kashas. We just learn out from Achos Isha. But you're not. You're just doing this with your svara. You're going to learn everything out from Achos Isha. You can't learn out Eishes Ish. You can't learn out Eishes Ach. So the Gemara says, B'shalai mekula masin. I understand how you can learn all arayas from Achos Isha except for two. Eishes Ish ve'Eishes Ach. Ikel mifrach. How could you learn out Eishes Ish and Eishes Ach? Why? Mal Achos Isha shekein ein lahet b'makam mitzvah. Tome be'Eishes Ach sheish lahet b'makam mitzvah. Eishes Ach is permitted in the case of a mitzvah with yibum, so you can't learn that out. It's unique, and also Eishes Ish nami yivkel mivrach malahanach sheken ein laheta b'chaye oisun. Term Eishes Ish yesh laheta b'chaye oisun. Eishes Ish is also unique that in the lifetime of the person who caused the iser, the husband, you're actually permitted. So those two are unique. So the answer is, you're right. We still learn out from Achos Isha. There's problems. The answer is we're using a hekish. Once you have a hekish, we don't ask kashas. The answer is El Amar Rav Yona v'Yitem Rav Huna B'Rav Yeshua Amar Kra Kol Asher Yaseh Mikol Hatov V'Seilu V'Nichrusu Hukshu Kol Arayis Kum Lachos Isha. There's a hekish connecting all arayis, not just a svara. A hekish connecting all arayis to Achos Isha. Ma Achos Isha L'Tafsi B'Kedushin Af Kol L'Tafsi B'Kedushin. Therefore, we don't ask kashas. We learn it out from Achos Isha. So all arayas are not tafis but kedushin because we learn it out from Achos Isha. Achos Isha is not tafis kedushin, so too all arayas are not tafis kedushin. Just to end with this, there is one woman that we paskin today is an erva, and kedushin is tafis, and that's a nida, right? Every nida is chayiv kares. What happens if the woman's a nida? It happens. The kala is a nida. You give her a ring, and you say arei mikdeshes li. The halach is it works. Why? I thought we learned at all arayas. Ihachi, afilu nida nami. Then how come a nida is typhus kedushin? Alamar Rabbi didn't Abaye says akol moed bal nida bal soida shein avlad mamzer. Everyone agrees that if you marry a nida, the kedushin is typhus, and the child is not a mamzer. It's the only chayiv kares that does not create a mamzer is a nida. Okay, it creates a pogrom. It's a bas ben nida, whatever. So maybe the midas, their midas are not perfect, but it will not create a mamzer. It's the heta for most bali tshuva, right? So what's the story? So how come nida is the exception? The answer is nida is different. Amar Chizkiya Amar Kra Vatihi Nidasa Aleha. The pasuk says she is in a state of nida. Vatihi Nidasa Aleha Tehei Bahavia. Vatihi is similar to the words tehei b'havia, that it shall be possible to havia to have kedushin. Tehei b'havia, it's possible to be with her. Meaning, it's a lashon of toifus kedushin. Vatehi nidasa alav, that aleha, whatever alav, that a state of nida is upon her. Tehei b'havia, havia is a lashon kedushin. Havaya is kedushin. So vatehi tehei b'havia, she shall have kedushin. Yep. So that's the exception to the word. Okay. Havia means becoming. It means married. So vatihi is tehei b'havia. She is the only arayis that actually has kedushin being typhus. We'll stop here.